And what if I told you that there is a new Grand Theft Auto that we will never get to see? I'm talking about a GTA 6 that was developed for many years, only to end up largely discarded, and of course for purely commercial reasons. The most interesting part is that this story, which came to light some time ago, is the missing piece of the puzzle that explains all the events we've seen with this company in recent years. The drought of announcements, the rushed and poorly executed projects, the departure of key figures from the company, the lack of motivation among Rockstar employees, and the countless leaks that ultimately led to nothing. Everything makes sense when you put it all together and explain it through this story that emerged a few months ago. GTA 6 was cancelled to make another GTA 6. I'm sure you all remember it, the golden era before GTA 6, a time we can roughly place at the end of the past decade, those final years before transitioning into the one we are in now. GTA 6 was everywhere, and its imminent announcement seemed more and more like a short-term reality. Back then, rumors circulated that the new GTA would be set in Vice City and Latin America during the 1980s, with a story centered around drug trafficking, making strong references to Narcos and the story of Pablo Escobar. This rumor was so detailed that there was even talk of a young Martin Madrazo making a return. Well, looking back, it might seem a bit ridiculous, but you get the idea. I'm sure these details sound familiar to you. There was a time when this was all anyone talked about when mentioning GTA 6. With a new Red Dead fading further into the past, GTA Online receiving less and less content, and a growing number of teases emerging back then, the announcement seemed like it was just around the corner. But then, months passed, and years passed, and nothing ever came. Once again, silence covered the entire landscape. The leaks stopped, and the excitement of hopeful fans was replaced by frustration and disappointment, filling that infinite void. And that's how things remained until 3 years later when GTA 6 was finally leaked, revealing a game that, without judging whether it's better or worse, was absolutely nothing like what everyone had expected. But how is that possible? If everything we had heard about the game was tied to that story and that setting. Rockstar itself had been testing 1980s weapons in Red Dead Redemption 2 years before under the codename Project Americas. We even found those files and brought them to light, so what happened? Gonna note that was a user who back in those years shared supposed information about GTA 6. While of course anyone could do this, what made this person stand out was their accuracy in predicting the Red Dead Redemption 2 trailers and foreseeing the GTA Online submarine for the Cayo Perico DLC. I should add that the user eventually gained a bad reputation, as after these correct predictions, they tried to make others that ultimately led nowhere. Considering the predictions that put them above the countless frauds we come across daily, I can tell you that this user took another gamble, this time giving a release date for the GTA 6 trailer, March 2020. It's obvious they were wrong this time, but later we'll see how a cancelled announcement in the spring of 2020 makes everything fit together quite well. At the beginning of that year, several key factors emerged, elements that we can now consider crucial in making sense of this entire story. Dan Houser suddenly leaves Rockstar Games. A global epidemic puts the world in check, forcing us to stay home and work remotely, slowing everything down even further. And then the great contradiction arises. A report by none other than Jason Schreier. His name probably sounds familiar because he was the journalist who just hours before Rockstar officially announced that the GTA 6 trailer would arrive in December, published an article saying Rockstar would announce GTA 6 that same week, and it wasn't just a lucky guess. This man had already built a strong reputation over the years, and the way he boldly revealed that information makes it clear that his source was incredibly reliable. Otherwise, he wouldn't have risked his credibility like that. But going back to 2020, this same journalist published an article that none of us could or wanted to believe. We ignored it because it seemed impossible at that point. Yet in that article, he stated without a doubt that GTA 6 at the start of 2020, 7 years after the release of the previous GTA, was still in its early stages of development. This was shocking. Just the thought that we had spent 7 years waiting for news about a game that seemed closer than ever, only to be told by a highly reputable source that they had just started working on it, was mind-blowing. Simply put, it felt like a nightmare we wanted to wake up from. And that was when the great contradiction emerged. The insider Tezfun, who also has a certain reputation within the community, contradicted Jason's claims and boldly stated that development began in 2014 and was already about 70% complete. A glimmer of hope, something we blindly clung to. Maybe guided more by our hearts than by reason, I think we all wanted to believe Tez over Jason. And so the debate remained unresolved, but the fact remains we never got that long-awaited announcement until we received some unfortunate news. Chris Klippel, journalist and founder of Rockstar Mag, and of course someone with significant credibility in this whole mess, revealed that GTA 6 had gone through a restart after Dan Houser left, early 2020. In a way, he was giving weight to Jason's earlier statement that the game was still in its early stages of development. This suddenly made that hard-to-accept reality much more believable. And of course, it also meant that Tez's claim that the game was 70% complete and had been in development since 2014 was also true. But his statement lacked the key piece of information that Chris had just revealed. And that's exactly what Jason already knew when he made that shocking claim that got him called crazy. Since insiders only received some information, never the full picture, it's clear that Tez simply didn't know about the reboot. But Jason, with his strong connections inside Rockstar Games, had the full story. So the game that supposedly began development in 2014, the one Tez was referring to in an attempt to discredit the terrible news Jason revealed in 2020, was actually a different game. A different GTA 6 that we will never see. A GTA 6 set in the 1980s, centered around drug trafficking with a story heavily inspired by Narcos. A game that would have been announced in the spring of 2020 and quite possibly would have already been released by now. But the other GTA 6, the one that has been officially announced, is the one that has only been in development for 5 or 6 years. Sort of, because obviously not everything from the original project was scrapped. Parts of the map, the city, and any timeless models would have already been created and likely reused. However, the script, motion capture, cinematics, vehicles, NPCs, and any other content tied to that 80s themed GTA 6 could not have been repurposed for this new vision of GTA 6. Does this mean that the game has only been in development for 5 years? No. What it does mean is that development was restarted 5 years ago. But a restart doesn't mean they went from that 70% completion down to 0. The city was still there, many vehicles, especially older models, could still be used in the game as classics. Mechanics, the weather system, and wildlife are all elements that don't change much whether the setting is the present day or 40 years ago. However, rewriting the entire story, hiring new actors, redoing motion capture, and all the other elements that had to be redone is a significant chunk of that 70% lost. And of course, it also adds several more years to GTA 6's development, likely causing the delays in the game's announcement and release that we've experienced over the past 4 to 5 years. This way of looking at things gives a lot of meaning to Dan Houser's departure from Rockstar Games. Imagine seeing a project he had written, a project that had already been in development for 6 years, being thrown in the trash, forcing the team to restart almost the entire story from scratch. For Rockstar's founder, it may have even felt like a huge sign of disrespect, discarding a script he had likely spent the final years of his career at the company working on. And one way we'll be able to verify if this story is true, the credits of GTA 6. If Dan Houser's name is missing, or if he is there but not listed under the writing team, then that would mean the story of Jason and Lucia isn't his. And if that turns out to be the case, then all of this is unfortunately true. Of course, this also explains the long drought of announcements we experienced in those years, as well as the rushed remasters Rockstar put out to avoid leaving such a huge gap in their release schedule in the early years of this decade. Think about it, how does Rockstar explain to Take-Two that the game set to make them trillions will need to wait another 3 or 4 years? All because they spent 7 years writing a story that they now think won't be as marketable. This also explains the demotivation among Rockstar's employees, not just due to the massive hack and recent leaks, but likely also because of this decision. It explains the drought of DLCs for their current online modes, and of course, the low quality of the ones that were released. But there's one exception, and this is the missing piece of the puzzle, the key to understanding everything, because what happened to that version of GTA 6 that Rockstar decided to never release? It would be very strange if they simply threw away all those years of work spent developing an entire 1980s era world. So where could all of that discarded content be? Welcome to Cayo Perico, a Colombian island clearly inspired by Pablo Escobar's hacienda, where a powerful drug lord operates alongside his minions. Curiously, this DLC came with a strong 1980s influence. Most of the vehicles added were from that era, older weapons were introduced, and the update was packed with Easter eggs referencing Rockstar's previous game, Red Dead Redemption 2. And then of course there were brand new mysteries, things that felt on the level of a new GTA game. For example, the Loch Ness Monster. Not to mention Cayo Perico's vegetation, a lush, dense landscape with a completely different style, quality, and variety than anything else on the map. The Cayo Perico Heist DLC was the dumping ground where Rockstar disposed of the cancelled version of GTA 6, the game they had been developing since 2014. It's where they gathered everything that wouldn't fit into their new project with Jason and Lucia. The part of the map that was cut, the Latin American section, just so happens to be exactly where Cayo Perico is located. Of course, the island isn't the full extent of what Rockstar had planned for that GTA 6, but it was specifically designed to incorporate all that vegetation, those biomes, structures, vehicles, and objects that ultimately wouldn't make it into the final game. Because Cayo Perico, being outside the country, also has its own automobile market. And in case there was any doubt, the timeline lines up perfectly with everything I've explained in this video. Cayo Perico was released at the end of 2020, but we were told its development began at the start of that same year. At the time, this struck many as odd. How could such a huge DLC, one that expanded the map this much, be developed in less than a year by a company that takes weeks to fix minor vulnerabilities, months or even years to patch a broken game, decades to release new titles? Up to that point, Rockstar had only added smaller updates, new missions, a few characters, some interiors, and not much else. And even those took nearly as long to develop. All of this happened during a supposed period of intense development for the next GTA, a game that should have been demanding all of Rockstar's resources. So how did they manage to release Cayo Perico so quickly? Because it was already made. Cayo Perico was so big, impressive, and developed in record time because it was built from the scraps of a scrapped GTA 6, one that would have transported us to an incredible version of Vice City, creating one of the most astonishing maps we had ever played. A map that, thanks to Latin America's involvement, would have had a huge territory to explore, and it would have taken place in one of the most iconic eras of all time, the 1980s. A drug trafficking storyline, one that would have been vastly different from the heist-focused narrative we've been experiencing for an entire decade. That GTA 6, which was practically finished and on the verge of being announced, a game we should have seen a trailer for 5 years ago, was cancelled. Why? Most likely for commercial reasons. It seems Rockstar didn't see an old-school GTA Online as profitable due to the technological limitations of the 80s. They had already experienced failure with Red Dead Online for that exact reason. So, they changed direction. They decided to redesign GTA 6 into a game that would be far more commercially viable, one that could sustain them for the years it would take to make another game. Rockstar's goal is clear: repeat the success of Grand Theft Auto 5 and Grand Theft Auto Online at all costs, and that's why they shifted focus. Yet, this was the same Rockstar that crafted the deep emotional story of Red Dead Redemption 2. The same Rockstar that was developing this cancelled GTA 6. This is a story we will never get to experience, one that they've probably decided to change in favor of a more entertaining plot with a lighter, more comedic tone rather than a deep and emotional one. They likely want to avoid repeating what happens with games as dark and profound as GTA 4 or Red Dead, which despite leaving a lasting impact on players and hitting them right in the feels, have a much shorter lifespan than a purely commercial product like GTA 5. Because at the end of the day, if there's no technology to sell you an Oppressor Mark III, a high-tech super tank, a missile-loaded jetpack, or to fill the game with secret underground facilities guarded by cutting-edge AI robots, then clearly the project isn't worth it. And if you don't like it, grab the door and leave. We'll miss you, Dan Houser. All we have left is to travel to Cayo Perico, wander through its lands, explore its lush vegetation, drive its vintage vehicles, and try to grasp those last remnants of the soul of the cancelled GTA 6, forever buried in this paradise of despair. The most beautiful landfill in which the GTA 6 that could have been now rests, a game we will never, ever get to play.